Yo, what's going on? So when it comes to making beats, I definitely have a certain sort of equation or formula that I use when I'm making beats, especially when it comes to sample-based music, and I use it probably 90% of the time. And that is, I record a sample, chop up the sample, make a pattern with it, and then I'll add on the drums, bass, whatever else I'm going to add on to that beat. So it really means that the sample is driving the beat. What I wanted to do today is kind of change that up a little bit, try a new workflow, and see if it really has an effect on the beat and the final product. So in order to do that today, there's definitely a few different ways we could do that, but I have found a sample, but rather than chopping up the sample and making a pattern with it, I'm going to lay down a drum pattern, and by doing that, I'm thinking the drum pattern will more so drive the beat, and it will be the more focal point of the beat. And what I'm also kind of curious to see is how starting with the drums may change my sample chop and may change the pattern that I come up with in terms of the sample. Because what I usually do with my typical beat making formula is after I make this sample chop and pattern, I will then try to match the drums to match that sample pattern. But because now we're starting with the drums, I'm thinking the sample pattern will more so be trying to match the drums. So I'll lay down a drum pattern and then we can record the sample, chop it up, and see how starting with the drums and changing the workflow may actually affect the final product. So I've started up just by loading a bunch of drum samples into the MPC. I'm thinking I can start just by laying down a basic pattern, and I have a few different sort of percussive sounds that I wouldn't typically use because I'm thinking if I really try to make the beat have a little bit more texture to it in terms of the drums, it will just really drive home the fact that I'm trying to change the workflow a little bit. And just in general, when it comes to making music, I find whether it be changing the order of operations or just sort of trying to change the way you do things making music, it's a really good way to experiment and work your creativity and try to come up with something new and get away from your typical style. So that being said, let's lay down a drum pattern, see what we come up with. I'm currently at 83 BPM just because that's sort of a speed I like working with. So let's lay it down, let's see what we can do. So now that we have that drum pattern laid down, let's mess with the sample a little bit, put it on the MPC, chop it up, and see what we can come up with in terms of a pattern. Today we're going to be using this record by Creative Source. They're self-titled. There's a couple samples on here. I have sampled it before, but I just found a little piece a couple days ago that I thought would be a good beat. So here's just a little taste of some of the chops I came up with. So it's a pretty soulful sample. Typically what I would do is just speed it up a little bit, start messing around, see what chops I could come up with. But now I'm going to play the drum pattern and just mess around with the sample and see if I can come up with any patterns that way. And that way we can really see if we can match the drum pattern. Let's do it. I'm going to mess around with the speed of the sample a little bit, so I'm going to turn the semi down, see how that sounds. I'm super into that. The one thing I've noticed that I've really liked about trying to follow the drums rather than follow the sample is by laying down the drums first, I'm not influenced by the sample to come up with the BPM, because I feel like had I used the sample to come up with the BPM, I would have tried to just match the sample, but since I already had the drums laid down and I was just adding the sample afterwards, I slowed down the semi, I messed around with a few different sounds of the sample, but still left it at that original drum BPM, which was 83. And it kind of forced me to come up with a pattern that was different than one that I would typically do. So let's lay down a sample pattern on top of these drums, see how it sounds. Let's do it. I'm thinking that pattern matches the drums really well. I really like the vibe it's given us, but I'm going to copy the drum pattern onto a new sequence and we can see if we can come up with another sample pattern to match the drums. Let's do it. Alright, I think this beat is sounding pretty sick, and it's definitely not a style that I would typically do. I feel like it has that sort of shuffle that really followed the drums that we laid down. So now let's add some more to this beat. We'll add in a bass, maybe add in some other sort of sounds to make it a bit more interesting, and I think this beat's coming together really well, so let's do it. Okay, I think with that bass added, this beat is really coming together, and like I said, it's definitely not something in the style that I would typically do, but I'm really into it. So now I think we can add an intro to this beat, and I noticed one of the things I did with this beat, because I turned down the semi and made the sample a lot slower, this would be the BPM of the sample if it was just played in regular time. A lot slower than we have it in the beat, and the beat's more like this. So one of the things I really like to do when this sort of happens is I like to take it back to the original, or rather the natural BPM of the sample when I'm in this situation. So I'll show you what I mean. It kind of allows us to really have like a slow sample, but then when the beat kicks in, it sounds like it really drops and gives it a lot of shuffle. So I'll add another sequence here, lay down the intro, and then I'll sort of show you how it sounds like when the beat drops in with this intro. And just to find the BPM that we want for the intro, I'm going to use the tap tempo button, and every time I hit a pad, I'm going to click the button, and it will give us a good idea of where that tempo is going to be for the intro. So it should be around 56. So now we have this sort of slow feeling intro, and then look what happens when we drop into the beat. And it might just be sort of a stylized thing that I'm into, but I really love the way it goes from that slow tempo and then has a quick tempo change when the beat drops, and it really just gives it a good bounce once it does hit. I really like that a lot. So now the last thing I think we can do for this beat is add in just a little bit of vox, as in just having like sort of a rapper talking a little piece of it. We can add it onto this beat, and it just gives a little bit more for the ear to listen to. It makes it a little bit more interesting. So I grabbed a little sample from a Biggie song where he's saying, "I like that." I'll make another sequence, the same as the first one, but this time we're just going to add that vox in so that every few bars you can add that in, and it just gives a little bit more variation. Let's do it. Okay, I think that's it for this beat. I hope you like how it turned out, and I hope this video kind of showed that changing up your workflow a little bit can sometimes lead to different styles and just lead you to sort of work your creativity a little bit. But if you liked the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you want to see in a future video. Appreciate you so much as always. Thank you for hanging out. Peace.